What's up, everybody? I'm Chef Matty B, and today we are back at TA Appliances and Barbecues here in Kitchener. Easter's around the corner, which means I'm coming at you with a fantastic recipe that you can do for your Easter dinner, and that's gonna be a stuffed rack of lamb. It's gonna be herbaceous and flavorful, full of those spring vibes. It's gonna be delicious, but the first thing we gotta do is get that stuffing going, so let's get to it. So for this stuffing, I wanted to go for some flavors that work really well with lamb. For this one, I went for dried apricots. I'm just gonna give them a little rough chop here. That way they incorporate into the stuffing a little bit easier. And we don't really want a big chunk of apricot when you're biting into your lamb. Just a little bit to get that sweetness, get that fruitiness out of it without being overpowering. And then I'm gonna take them and put them in a container, and I'm gonna top that up with some really hot water and let them soak for about an hour. That's gonna help soften them up and bring out a little bit more of their sweetness. And it's also gonna help the flavor spread through the stuffing, because when they're dry, it's a little harder to leach that flavor out into the breadcrumbs that we're gonna be using as our binder. The next thing we're gonna need for our stuffing is a shallot. So I have a nice small one here, I'm gonna get peeled. And for cutting it up, I'm going for a really nice fine brunoise. We want this to be nice small pieces so it cooks out faster. And we're just looking to soften them and bring out some of that oniony flavor, bring a little bit of savoriness back into the stuffing. So just a nice small brunoise on that is perfect. And then for our herbaceous flavor, we're going for sage. This works great with the dried apricots and the lamb. And so we're gonna take most of our sage, but we're gonna keep a little bit that we can put on top while it's roasting in the oven. We're gonna pick down that sage because we only want the leaves for this. And then again, we're just hitting it with the rough chop. So now it's time to start cooking our stuffing. And I wanted to start off with a good bit of butter here that we're gonna get browned. That brown butter is going to bring out a nice nuttiness. Again, just working really nicely at that lamb, sage, and dried apricot flavor that we have going on here. So about a cup of butter into the pan over high heat, and it's going to brown up pretty quickly, so just keep an eye on it. We don't want it going too far where it's going to start turning bitter. We're just looking to bring out that nuttiness and some of that sweetness. And then we can turn down the heat before adding our shallots. I let the shallots cook for a couple of seconds, and then I'm gonna add spinach. I'm just adding a good handful to this, not the whole container, because I don't want the stuffing to be all spinach, but it is nice to add a bit of color and a little bit of filler to the stuffing, lighten it up a little. And then we can go in with our sage and start letting that cook. We're looking for the spinach to fully wilt down and all those flavors to just come together, and it's smelling amazing at this point. So now we're gonna take that spinach, butter, and shallot mixture, and we're gonna put it into a bowl, and you wanna make sure to get all of that butter and try and scrape off anything that sticks to the bottom, because that's all extra flavor. And you can see here that those apricots really softened up with that soak, so we can add a bunch of those into our stuffing as well and give it a stir. We're gonna use panko for this one. They're a little nicer for keeping it light and fluffy, as they stay a little softer than regular breadcrumbs. So we can add a good amount of those to our mixture here and give it a stir until all those breadcrumbs are saturated with that butter and all the different flavors. And that can go into the fridge to fully cool down before we stuff it into our lamb. For our lamb, I bought a French rack. It just looks a little bit nicer, and I find it slightly easier to work with, being able to see the bones as opposed to needing to eyeball it. And you can see that there's a line here that separates that little chunk of fat from the loin. I'm gonna run my knife down that to kind of split the two, and then very carefully I'm gonna start cutting into the loin, leaving about ½ an inch of meat between the bone and the knife. And I'm just gonna keep on scoring that in a bit of a spiral pattern here. I'm trying to butterfly it out, and I'm going for about 3 folds, one being with the bone, and then 2 additional folds where it's just the loin meat. We can open that up, and you can see how much space that gives us, that we can now take our cooled down stuffing and fill it all up. I'm just gently packing it in there. I don't want it to be super dense, but I do want to get as much of it in there as possible. And then you roll it up on itself to encase that stuffing in the lamb. And that's looking perfect right there. Next up, we're gonna tie it. And I find that easier to do with the lamb loin flipped over. So I'm gonna just take my string, slip it through, and I start in the middle and do a quick butcher's knot on that. You can do a simple double knot if you don't know the butcher's knot. I just find the classic butcher's knot a little bit faster and a little bit easier. And then just work your way down in between each of the bones, making sure you're not tying it too tight that you're squishing the stuffing out the ends, but tight enough that it's not gonna fall back apart once it's in the oven. And with it all tied up, it's looking perfect and ready to go into the pan to get our sear. And so into a pan, we're gonna go over high heat with a good amount of oil. We want about 1/4 inch on the bottom of the pan. We wanna make sure that there's enough to get a nice crust on the outside of this lamb. And then we can season it with a little kosher salt before adding it to the pan. And I go straight with the meat side down with a little bit of a press to make sure that we get even coverage. And then I'm gonna roll it every 30 to 45 seconds or so, making sure that we get that crust on the entire loin and not just on the spot that's touching the pan, because we want that entire loin to have that crust from bone to bone. And once we've rolled our loin across the entire thing, we can pop it back onto the sheet pan. And this is where I'm gonna add some thyme for some extra herb flavor and the rest of that sage that we saved from earlier, and pop that on top to get flavor into it while it goes into the oven at 450 degrees on convect. It's gonna roast for about 25 minutes, and that should give us a nice medium. And then I remove the herbs from on top of the lamb, and I'm gonna just pop the lamb onto my cutting board, getting it off of that hot tray, and let it rest for about 5-10 minutes. Now this rack of lamb is looking and smelling amazing. So let's cut into it and see how it is on the inside, and then give it a taste. And you can see that filling is so nice in there, packed full of flavor. The cook on this is perfect. This is gonna be a delicious bite of lamb. Everything about that lamb roast just screams Easter. So if you're doing a family dinner this Easter, this is like the perfect recipe to do. You can do it in the oven, or you can do it on the grill, or even in a pellet grill if you have one of those for a little extra smoke flavor. There's tons of different options for how you want to cook this, but the flavors are there, and this is delicious. And as always, if you guys are enjoying these types of videos, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this in the future, because we got plenty more recipes to share. But that's all I have for this time. So happy Easter, and we'll see you guys next time.